Hey guys, and welcome to CANNAMAntv. My name is Connor McLeod, and in this interview, I speak with GP, Executive Committee Member of the Medicinal Cannabis Clinicians Society, and founder of the Primary Care Cannabis Network, Dr. Leon Barron. In this interview, we discuss the Primary Care Cannabis Network and the importance of education in the cannabis space, the current medicinal framework for UK cannabis, the language which surrounds so-called medicinal cannabis, the importance of doctor-patient transparency regarding medicinal cannabis, and the general impact cannabis as a plant has on human civilization. Make sure and like and subscribe, and join me on Patreon, where you could help to build a stronger cannabis media platform for £3 a month. Now then, let's talk cannabis. We'll just we'll essentially get cracking then. I was looking over the stuff, and could you just start off by describing what the Primary Care Cannabis Network is?
Of course. That's a group that I put together a few years ago that essentially was put together with the aim of teaching GPs basic things about cannabis-based medicines, but basically to bring attention to the subject and to try and pitch it in a way that was kind of relevant to colleagues. So I reached out to a few GPs that I knew of in this space and tried to kind of just bring them on board. And, you know, written some guidelines, useful links to educational resources, and also try to kind of team up with other groups in the space that are perhaps more leaning towards the medical side and the academic side. So, yeah, I just felt it was basically a platform to try and share knowledge and bring people together to learn about this subject.
Yeah, I mean, these kind of things are absolutely crucial, obviously, in raising education and, you know, and a lot of the stigma that's associated with cannabis generally, but especially the medicine. I mean, we've seen that recently in the boy in Shetland, I think, who had his medicine taken off him. That's ridiculous.
It's crazy.
What do you make of that kind of situation?
So this was the chap that had a prescription for cannabis. That's right, isn't it? And that's from the Shetland Islands.
Yeah.
I mean, that's probably more responsibility of the police force to ensure that they actually know what the laws are. And, you know, it was a prescribed medicine. So it was completely, obviously, just a disaster for the patient. But it kind of puts the spotlight back on medical cannabis. You know, I know that's quite a loose term, but this was something that was prescribed for that patient by a doctor. So, you know, there's no one had any right to take that off him.
It seems like it's a bit of almost like a battleground. You know, there's this weird polarized spectrum where you've got people that are pushing through legislation which is restrictive, but it's still making it available. Medicine's available to people, and then on the other side, obviously, we've got the application of the medicine in the first place is difficult to even get through. You know, so I mean, it's really difficult to kind of move through these things. The medical cannabis access bill, obviously, that's
right,
like squashed essentially. Then
through.
I mean, how helpful would that have been?
Well, I think it ultimately would help in terms of improving access. I've always believed that if GPs were allowed to prescribe, you would see quite a few coming forward to prescribe. Because don't forget, a few years ago when cannabis was rescheduled, there were only a few doctors in the UK who were kind of actively engaged in the subject. And they're people that I knew at the time anyway, Professor Barnes, and there are a few others. And now we've gone from having, say, 3 or 4 specialists who are prepared to prescribe to probably about 100, maybe more, just within a space of 2 or 3 years. So it just shows you that when doctors are allowed to prescribe, they will come forward and they'll become more interested. So I think the bill that was put forward would have been a great step forwards. Yeah, and I think we probably would have found GPs becoming more interested in the subject.
I mean, how far back did that, you know, impact have? Did that really push us back quite a lot, do you think? We've got a lot of like footwork to go?
This access bill.
Yeah.
I'll be honest, Connor, it's not my, I don't know how it works from now on. I think there's going to be a second hearing from what I gather. I don't know when that is.
Yeah.
Do you know when they're going to revisit that?
No, to be honest, it was when I was looking over it, it was the same with the boy from Shetland, and I seen that at the top.
Yeah.
When you type in medical cannabis UK, the first thing that comes up is doomed medical cannabis access bill. It was an article from the other day, and it kind of just, it's like doomed medical access bill, and then the news article directly below it is the boy from Shetland getting his medicine taken off him, and it just kind of paints this picture in the UK of this. This bizarre situation where there seems to be movement, there seems to be small trickles of positive progress, but at the same time, people are getting stuff taken off them, and there are instances with the police. I mean, this is, there needs to be something that needs to kind of neutralize this thing.
Yeah, I know. And unfortunately, it's a shame that when you look elsewhere across the globe, if you look to North America and countries where this has been used as a medicine for a long time, or there's recreational access, it's just kind of painted in a different light. They don't have often all these things that we're dealing with. It's just accepted in society, and it's an option for those that want to access cannabis and use it for medical reasons.
One of the things that helps tremendously is a lot of these online seminars that you also participate in. A lot of these that are really helpful. I mean, I think one of them recently was relating to cannabis and dementia. Could you talk a little bit about that? I mean, what is the progress that's been made there?
Well, again, it's not an area I know a huge amount about, but I know that just from having conversations with individuals who are working more in academia, that this has come up a few times in conversation. And I spoke to Dedi Mary, who's at the Technion in Haifa in Israel, and he's, from what I gather, he's got probably the largest laboratory in the world looking at cannabis strains and applying those to various clinical trials. And I just remember when I asked him a few months ago about the areas that he thought showed most promise for cannabis-based medicines, he said Alzheimer's and dementia. Not twofold. Firstly, potentially having protective properties to prevent the onset of dementia or Alzheimer's, potentially, and also to help with people that already have dementia, maybe that become agitated or interrupted sleep and so on. So there's like really good potential, I think, in time for cannabis-based medicines to be used for dementia or for treating symptoms of dementia. So I think it's from what I gather, a really interesting area of research that's being looked at. So I
mean, in your own experience as a physician, what have you seen, from the beginning? I mean, it's only been 3 or 4 years since this is actually, the ball's been rolling.
Well, I've primarily seen patients through my NHS practice who use cannabis not from medical clinic, cannabis clinics and on prescription. So I've known many patients for years that use cannabis to self-medicate, and the outcomes often are quite good. So you've got to listen to someone when they're telling you that cannabis helps with their sleep or it's helping them with pain relief, then that's relevant, and you need to listen to that and try and learn from that. I've only come across a handful of patients who, within my NHS practice, who are going to clinics and getting medicine on prescription, and they often find these treatments are profound in terms of improving quality of life, and even coming off other medicines as well can be very helpful. So because most of my work, if not all of my clinical work, is in the NHS, I guess I've still got, when it comes to cannabis, it's generally those patients that are accessing cannabis illegally, if you like, but might be using it for certain conditions. And that's always been the case. I mean, as far back as I can remember, there's always been patients that I've looked after that use cannabis. I have also seen some of the downsides of cannabis use. So particularly during psychiatry training posts, it wasn't unusual to see relapses of psychosis and schizophrenia with potent cannabis, high THC strains. But those were obviously individuals that were susceptible to problems. So yeah, I've seen it from all angles, but overall, I'm a strong believer, if it's done in the right way and it's prescribed safely, then it can be really beneficial to lots and lots of people.
It's funny that I actually find that really interesting. You know, the negative aspects, because obviously I'm a long-term cannabis consumer.
Okay.
And one of the things I've found, because obviously, and in that period of time, it'd be ridiculous to think you wouldn't experience negative impacts, you know.
Yeah.
And what I've came to notice is that when you overconsume, it has more of an impact emotionally. Cannabis. That seems to be the negative consequence. It's more of it's either a heightened circumstance or you feel there's more of a tense circumstance. But what I've also noticed is that it's never like I could see why there's such a tremendous difficulty with creating a clinical trial model that can be readily applicable over and over, because it's such a subjective cannabis is such a subjective, it interacts so subjectively, and that's what I've seen personally. But at the same time, what I've came to notice, that's where I always go into that position in my head where it's like you're rational, the recreational benefit of cannabis being applied to a societal basis, and you obviously apply that to alcohol, damage limitation, things like that. Yeah. And what I've came to realize, personally what I've thought is that even after 20 years of cannabis use, 2 or 3 days of whatever they call it, reset period, whatever, you go back to a neutral basis, you know. And then what I've came to notice, I was like, that should be enough for it to be applied on a one scale basis, just with the fact that such extensive use. But 100%, that's
in fact, you know. Connor, look, I've just ordered this up. I don't know if have you read it yet?
No, I haven't. Is that Professor Nutt's book?
David Nutt's book.
Yeah.
So you know, if you're kind of interested in the wider kind of use of cannabis in society, which is obviously much more focused on recreational use and just, you know, as a wider conversation. And I think Professor Nutt definitely has quite strong views on that when it comes to addiction.
I'm hoping to get him on the channel.
Yeah, you should. Because you know, it does seem to be overall quite a safe plant, if you like, to use in its various forms. Although I do tend to try and avoid the conversation around recreational use and because I think it distracts a bit from you know,
do you know what's so funny about this as well? I find so amusing is the fact that obviously, like, I've had my ear to the ground with UK cannabis since about, I don't know, 2004 or something like that. So it's an extensive period of time. And what I've come to notice is the change. It's like, it's so incremental. So way back, you know, 2003, 2004, couldn't even really talk about cannabis. The endocannabinoid system in UK conversation wasn't even present really. And then, so now we'll have this established body of knowledge and you're moving it through. Now, it's so incremental that we're now down to a language barrier. You know, it's quite a humanist thing.
But you know, Connor, I don't ever forget how I'm always reminded how much patients or consumers of cannabis know about it. So I don't pretend to be more expert, if you like, than a lot of you know, I've met people along the way who have extensive knowledge of genetics and strains and subtypes and methods of using it and so on. So you know, I totally hold my hands up and say all I can do from where I'm placed is learn as much as possible about the science and also try and just communicate that to the medical community, because I think we have to know about it. Which is just integral to our work, and it's only going in one direction. And I think the medicine and the science is going to just go off now at such a rapid pace. We're going to see new interesting strains and delivery methods and products, and whether it's vapes or capsules or patches or oil, you know, it's a really exciting area of medicine, and it is going to end up in more mainstream. It could take a few years, but I just think it's inevitable. It's going to end up.
To be honest, people like yourself help this though. Can you create the barrier? There's been the groups obviously that have kind of kept it alive, which has been also the illegal market, the recreational people, activists, stuff like that. You fast forward now, you've got individuals such as yourself who are curious, who are willing to obviously the science is just like an avalanche of information, which is really helpful. Interestingly, obviously, it's cannabis-based medicinal products for human use. All I could think to myself is how much of an inhibiting factor was the creation of that term, you know, cannabis-based medicals, because it doesn't seem to have helped.
I mean, I don't know. I don't know is the answer.
Because when I look at it, I just think to myself, they created such a narrow spectrum of influence with it. There's half a dozen, conditions that are applicable to that category of medicine. So
I think if you look at the Home Office regulation, when they define what a product is, I can't remember the specifics, but it basically, it gives you all the information about what a cannabis-based medicinal product would what its constituents would be.
Yeah.
And it is quite broad, actually. So it would contain unlicensed oils or flour, for example. Right. So it does encompass kind of the plant, if you like, as a whole. But and then there's obviously a distinction between licensed medicines, unlicensed medicines. Then you get to things like NICE guidelines and what's approved for funding, for which conditions and so on. So there's various kind of levels of regulation. And some of these things are quite arbitrary. Like it's quite hard to clump things into certain categories in practice. And most of the, it's worth remembering, most of the private clinics and the doctors who are prescribing in private clinics are prescribing unlicensed medicines. So those will be extracts from the full plant, flour or oils and tinctures.
Yeah, so it's one of the things that makes me potentially cynical of the whole framework in the UK is that it seems very convenient for these private clinics for the legislation to be so ignorant. This is quite a convenient setup.
Yeah. Unfortunately, there's not much of a middle ground between the licensed medicines and then the unlicensed. So I don't know if do you want me to talk more about
definitely
product? So you've got really there's two main medicines that are prescribed. One is Sativex, which has a license for spasticity in MS. Sativex is 1-to-1 ratio of THC to CBD, and it's taken as a spray under the tongue. Now that's been through very expensive, large clinical trials, but specifically looking at spasticity in MS. So it was found to be effective and safe. It got the license, it's approved for use. And if you have spasticity in MS, and you live in a part of the country where it's funded, you get it on prescription, and that can be prescribed within the NHS. There's also another medicine called Epidiolex, which is essentially purified CBD, but it's been through licensing and big clinical trials, and that has a license for 2 specific forms of pediatric intractable epilepsy in children. So Lennox-Gastaut and Dravet syndrome. So if you have those conditions, it will be paid for, and there's a license for its use. And then there's also something called Nabilone, which is a bit more specific. But essentially, if you don't fall into one of those camps, so if you don't have spasticity with MS, or you don't have Lennox-Gastaut and Dravet syndrome, you're then just looking at unlicensed medicines which haven't been through large clinical trials. They're not funded for by the NHS. They won't be prescribed within NHS settings. And that's where the private sector has kind of focused its attention on. Yeah. And it's vast. I mean, there's product now coming from all over the world. Lots of different licensed producers have the various requirements to get into the UK, get the product in. And I'm sure probably from patient groups, there's all kinds of companies now that you can get certain product and certain strains and ratios and so on. So there's definitely kind of 2 camps. You've got the licensed medicines and you've got the unlicensed. Although essentially you're still talking about the same cannabinoids. You're still talking about CBD and THC, which you get in the others. So
just say this. I mean, it does seem, let's say, when you sit back like that, there is a very clear progress. I mean, I thought you were going to actually mention about there's been obviously mistakes in packaging. It's almost satirical. It's like it's supposed to be a 20-4 ratio or whatever, and it turns out to be completely off. Yeah. These are very relevant, considering the real world data that's supposed to be coming through drug science.
I guess it's worth reminding ourselves that the oils and the flowers contain so many different active compounds, such a mix of active ingredients that it's very hard to kind of pinpoint exactly which one might be doing what. So it's definitely a different way of prescribing. It's a different type of medicine.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly that. That makes me curious though, exactly about that though, because it's like it's almost it almost emphasizes it seems to be more corporately run, the legislation behind this. It's just maybe we've been cynical, I don't know, but just the idea, because like you said, the amount of cannabinoids alone, overall 560 molecules. Of that, cannabinoids 120. Then you've got terpenes, flavonoids, and then the fatty acids, all these different other things.
That's right.
You don't know the phytochemical ratio that's having the best impact. So all that's happened is that they've managed to monopolize a specific set of cannabinoids, put a stamp on it, and now it's like, do you know what I mean? It just kind of seems so frustrating for so many people. Like,
I think you can look at it from different viewpoints, and I guess the angle that the regulators have taken and the governing bodies like NICE and some of the medical establishment is that we don't have the data because we don't have randomized controlled trials and double-blinded trials. And really that kind of model and that way of looking at things is saying, okay, we need to kind of pinpoint these specific active compounds and then run them on a blind against a placebo and then see what the outcomes are and so on. But in practice, we know that often the plant, with all its different cannabinoids and terpenes and all these other things that we mentioned, work synergistically and produce a much better effect for someone. And obviously strains and ratios are different for different people. Some people might be more sensitive than others, so you can't really marry the two up. It's very hard to like take that kind of that pharmaceutical approach to it. It's a different type of data collection, and I think that's why T21 are kind of arguing more for observational studies where you prescribe for patients and then you follow them up and you start to gather the outcomes and the benefits and so on. So that's the approach that most other countries have taken. And what I think is nice about that is that you can treat patients at the same time as collecting data, and so really it's kind of a win-win. But I think the UK is quite conservative when it comes to these kind of things, and they're still a bit apprehensive.
So I suppose that's that kind of alleviated this small amount of my cynicism, I suppose, your description there, because I kind of seen more of the fact that it was almost like there was a pre-existing, the pre-existing framework wasn't ready for the new type of medicine that cannabis proposed.
Well, it's like you're trying to kind of fit what's the saying? Is it a square peg in a round hole? The other way around. You know what I'm saying? It's like like the two. It's a botanical medicine. If you like, it's quite old fashioned. In fact, I spoke to I had the huge privilege last week of speaking to Mashula.
I've listed right here. You got to talk about that.
I spoke to Mashula, and he sort of said, medical cannabis, whatever that means. He sort of said, really it's a mixture, isn't it? It's a mixture of compounds that doctors were prescribing, in the 19th century. It's like an old-fashioned medicine. He didn't dismiss it at all. He said, no, it's very, very good. But I think you can look at it as either like a really crude way of prescribing or a really elegant, sophisticated way, because it's kind of like tailored to that individual, and it's kind of a bit of an experiment and a bit of a journey that the doctor and the patient go on to find the right dose. So I sort of see it from both angles. It could be seen as the ultimate medicine because it's so kind of unique to an individual, and you have to find, it's a real art, isn't it, to try and find the right strain, or you could argue it's really old-fashioned. It's not kind of, it's not up to date with kind of our standards and what we like to see from pharmaceutical drugs and so on. But ultimately I don't really care. I think it's what's right for a patient and what's available, and if it helps someone, then I think we should be using it more and prescribing it in primary care.
I think one of the fascinating things about cannabis, just as you're describing that there as well, is it seems to be the dichotomy that it provides with everything. It seems there's just a constant dichotomy right in the middle of cannabis, and it's like, when it comes to medicine, then what's medicine or what's recreational, the nature of the spectrum of how many how many things you can do with the plant. You know, the different ruderalis, you got the sativa, indica. You know, obviously these are physical characteristics, but you get the point. You know, it just seems so cool because that's what you've got, that intertwined the entirety through nature. You've got the yin and yang, this, you know, male female dichotomy. There's just this dichotomy, and cannabis represents the same thing.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because it's such a conversation. It's either like a conversation killer or it's a conversation opener. And I think if you're prepared to kind of go beneath the surface, because pre kind of 2017, maybe, I just didn't really have a strong view on it. I guess I was more in line with my colleagues who perhaps had seen more the negative side in clinical settings of cannabis. I probably had some of the same stigma that a lot of people have around it. And it didn't take a lot. It just took a few lectures and a few seminars, and then kind of going online and watching some documentaries about the history of the plant and the science and the discoveries, endocannabinoid system. And then all of a sudden you're like, okay, I see this now as a subject. I see this in a completely different light. Yeah. It's a really interesting scientific and social topic. You know, it covers everything. It's really interesting, and it's everywhere as well. Like, it's, you know, in the street down there, it's everywhere. You're never that far away from cannabis. So you know, I find it fascinating, and I just want to learn more and more about it. And I just think it has such an important role in terms of in terms of improving life quality and helping people. I think if it's done in the right way, in the right framework, it can be like life-changing.
It's funny that as well, because it just takes me back again when I was like, 13, 14, and I remember that the endocannabinoid system wasn't even discussed, and then it's still local, and still like parents or, you know, like relatives that are like, no, cannabis make you go insane, it'll do this, it'll make you lethargic, etc., etc. And then
what have you, Connor? What have you? So I'll turn it back on you now, because you said you've been doing this for many years. You've been kind of in this conversation. Like, are you finding there's slightly less of a stigma around it now when you say you're in this space, or it's kind of something you're?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, the first time I consumed cannabis I was 13, so that was like 19 years ago kind of thing. And since then it's like obviously just essentially continuous use, give or take a couple of months at the time, a period of time, you know, so kind of like a walking case study, which is quite good.
All right,
but yeah, the stigma wise conversation it's comical, and that's what makes me laugh about it, because I remember everybody, that's what I felt like. It was like just your peers that wasn't in the group of people that were like, it's bad for you. And even inside your peers, you had to, when you're at school, you didn't disclose it, because then you were stigmatized even from your friends and stuff. But now you fast forward it, and the thing that makes me laugh so hard about it is not only did it turn out to not be bad for you, it turned out to actually stimulate a physiological system which seems to like control everything else. That is like, you couldn't get more of a win.
I know. Well, yeah, that's it. And then what's interesting as well is that everyone, you know, at times in their life are looking for, they've perhaps tried conventional medicines and treatments that haven't worked for them. And I'm don't get me wrong, although I'm in this space, I'm a very much I'm a trained doctor, a GP. I've been through medical school. I've done, you know, I believe in the power of modern medicine. I think it has huge things to offer, and we shouldn't dismiss it. But there are lots of people where conventional medicine or treatments haven't worked for them. Yeah. Particularly as people get older, you know, they get a bit cranky in the joints and they're pain and they're not sleeping and so on. And, you know, I found there's kind of a shift around cannabis in the older population as well, who might come in and say, oh, I'm starting to use CBD that I've been buying from like this local shop, or, you know, my grandson's like, you know, get me some CBD balms and things. So, and then obviously if you look overseas, loads of people really from every demographic and age group are using cannabis for something or another.
That's actually really interesting you say that, because the stats that came out of Canada, I think it was after they had legalized, I think it was a year later, they had said that wasn't the previously assumed rise in the demographic that would be using cannabis more, which they assumed would be teens. It wasn't the case. It was actually those 55 and above. And that was it. That was exactly it. And it was a really interesting.
Like, someone might have like deep rooted ideas about cannabis, and because they've also been brought up back in the day with this kind of all the kind of negative things around it and all the imagery and so on.
Mm.
But then they hit a point in their lives where they're kind of like, okay, I've tried X, Y, and Z. I'm still suffering, or I'm still not right. And they know someone that maybe is getting a oil on prescription or vaping something, and they can see the effects for themselves. So yeah, those are that's your kind of your target audience, really. I think
CBD's been like insanely impactful. Like CBD, the situation,
massive.
the knock-on effect from Charlotte's Web in 2011,
Massive,
12.
Yeah.
Like enormously so. And like you say about the elderly asking for CBD, because a lot of the time, one of my neighbours, she did the same thing when she found out about the channel and stuff, and she was like, I then became her consultant, this lady in her early 70s, and she's got handed me the Holland and Barrett variety and all these other varieties. I'm standing there, my 15th dose of CBD that day to help this wee woman out.
Yeah, right. Because like everyone unfortunately suffer. We suffer at times in our lives, and someone said to me recently I was chatting to, I think, a journalist about CBD and why it's taken off. Why is it still here, or why is it so popular? Well, the basic answer is because it works.
Yeah.
It's not a fad. It's not like certain things that come and go in the health, in the wellness sector. You get all these vitamin things and this and that. But CBD works. It's like, it is a medicine, despite the fact it's a novel food. It's a medicine. Like it has all kinds of interesting properties. So if it didn't work, it wouldn't be the market that it is, and with all the growth that's expected in that sector.
It's funny that when you said novel food, I actually felt myself feeling cringy inside, because novel food, the fact that it's referred to that, I'm aware that's the right term, obviously, because it's through bullshit regulation, but it's a novel food, although it's thousands of years old.
Well, this is why, again, part of the reason I set the PCCN up is that I wanted to create some guidelines for doctors so they understood like what CBD is. How might it interact with other medicines that you prescribe? How is it how is it regulated, or what are the laws around CBD? What can you say? What can't you say? And we've actually published. There's also a group called the MCCS that I helped to run, the Medical Cannabis Clinicians Society. So we've got a few hundred members now in that group, and again, we publish guidelines, and there's a very good CBD guide for. I mean, it's really written for doctors and pharmacists, but I'm sure some of your audience as well would find it helpful.
Definitely,
it talks about just all the things that we should be looking for in products, and quality control, and certain things that should be on the labels and the packaging. Because although it's a novel food, I think there's a responsibility from groups that I'm involved in to kind of say, okay, fine, it might be a novel food, but people are using it for medical reasons, and you need to understand how it could affect other treatments, or interact with other drugs, or might it affect liver function and various things like that. So,
how do you see this evolving? Because obviously you mentioned a couple of groups. So obviously the PCCN network, the MCCS, like that. These are talking on CBD, which is obviously, like you mentioned, it's a food substance, but it's obviously medically applied. Is there going to be some synergy, some integration of some? Do you see this evolving further, other than just regulations from non-authoritative bodies, essentially?
Well, I guess it has to in time. We've kind of put this together. When I say we, myself and just colleagues that are in this space who are interested in it, almost because there's nothing out there that exists. So it's been actually quite exciting process, and quite fun in a way to kind of be at the start of something. But it's unique in medicine, and in that sense, because it's not been done before, but also it seems to sit in this space sort of slightly outside the like the norm, if you like. And so it's I know that Mike Barnes, Professor Barnes, who I work with on a few projects, educational projects, he wrote a paper, a very good paper last year to government that sort of recommended things like an office for medical cannabis, and kind of trying to like have some umbrella organization in government that could like really kind of help to regulate hemp production and medical cannabis, and just kind of give it the respect that it needs and the kind of authority that it needs, and to because it's a huge subject, and it does encompass a lot of different sectors, if you like. There's agriculture and medicine.
The Cannabis Industry Council was a hugely innovative move to have.
Might put that together. Might put that together, and there's a good spread of groups within it. Yeah.
That seems to be serious. That seems to be that's going to be it seems to be the force to be reckoned with in the few years to come, hopefully.
Could be. I mean, within a matter of weeks, he got over 100 organizations signing up. Yeah. So, it shows the interest in it. And I mean, it's early days, but I've been sitting in on the medical side of things, and there's some good discussions about how to kind of improve access and break down stigma, open up conversation, etc.
I think that's what seems to be so exciting when you're obviously in these meetings, is because there's all it's collectively made up of people who are active. It's not a case where you're dealing with bystanders. These are people that are going to be directly impacted by the legislation that's getting put through, and I think that's crucial.
Absolutely. And I've always found I have to say, having worked in this space for probably about the best part of 4 or 5 years, I found that I've learned so much from meeting people outside of medicine as well. So, I think part of the reason I find the work so interesting, so exciting, is I just meet almost every week like new interesting people from patient perspective, academia, industry, agriculture, genetics, I mean, it just goes on and on. I mean, it's like a real melting pot of interesting, often very innovative, creative people in the space. I think there's a lot of politicians who are really quite pro medical cannabis, but what happens in Westminster when push comes to shove is that a lot of the key decision makers say, well, we rescheduled cannabis in 2018. Now it's up to the medical authorities to kind of regulate this. So I think they passed the buck a bit, and that's where you get a bit of a deadlock, And
do you think that can be resolved? I mean, how easily do you think that's
I think resolved? It will. I think it will be resolved, and I just think it's kind of probably going to be a bit of a snowball effect where more and more patients are talking about it, more doctors becoming interested in it, and we just start to read and hear more about how it can be really beneficial for patients. And a lot of individuals also will find that they are faced with situations, whether it's immediate family members or friends who might need medical cannabis on prescription, because they are, I don't know, approaching end of life care, or they're suffering with some awful disease or symptom and so on. So it comes around to even those that are staunch, kind of, no, we're not interested, this is a no-go. That it's very much a human conversation, and every doctor at some point in their lives becomes a patient, or their relatives or their close friends are patients of some other doctor. So then I think it starts to get really interesting when those people might need cannabis on prescription, and the conversation opens up. So those that are really kind of denying access, there might come a time in their lives where they really need it, or someone they're close to really kind of would benefit from it. And it's interesting to sort of see that narrative open up.
That's really, actually, when you said that, it's quite poetic there when he says that, some doctors inevitably becomes patients over time.
Well, of course.
It's funny that, because I had a friend, sometimes.
I don't want it denied to me, God forbid, one day if I need it on prescription. It's, why would you do that? It's like, it's a really amazing medicine, and so why would you not allow it?
This is what I think brings in a lot of people that would be regarded as conspiracy theorists or just cynics and stuff like that, because exactly that. Why would you not? This is an extremely benign medicine. It's extremely effective medicine, but it has benign side effects, if any. And I just think it's what you said there a minute ago. I had a friend that said that years ago as well. He says he went on a bit of a rant about somebody being critical about him because consumes cannabis, and he said that exactly that. He's like, oh, it's all fine and well, they're being critical until they end up having cancer. you know, and then that's
right, or they need they looking after someone or for them themselves, you know. And I mean, what's lucky for us at the UK is that we can just learn from other countries. Like, so all the doubters, all the skeptics, I would just say to them, well, what's going on in Canada at the moment, or the US or Israel or Germany, like Australia? Are you having major problems with this, or is it such a bad thing? You know, like, okay. So and obviously you can look at the data sets that are coming out and what the conditions are that are being prescribed for, and the outcomes from these large kind of observational studies. I mean, it's pretty obvious, isn't it, how well it's how well it kind of fits into clinical medicine.
I mean, what do you think it's looking like this year, medically speaking, in the UK?
I don't know, Connor. You know, I think we'll definitely see more patients accessing cannabis through the private sector, through clinics. I'm actually working on a new project that hopefully is going to launch within the next 2 or 3 months, hopefully. And that's trying to find a way of supporting independent prescribers, albeit in a private capacity, because that's really the only way you can get scripts moving, but giving them the tools they need to prescribe. So education, peer support, but trying to kind of encourage them to prescribe within their own field of practice. If that makes sense. So it means they don't have to be employed by a cannabis clinic. And I think that might kind of open up access a bit and break down some of these barriers. So hopefully, with some of the work that I'm involved in, we can help in that respect. And then I think, I don't know about GP prescribing. I mean, it would be great if GPs could prescribe. If they could, it would have to be, I think, primarily in a private capacity. There aren't so many private GPs in the UK. NHS access, I think, is a long way off, personally. But this year, I mean, I think really this year we'll just see more patients accessing cannabis.
One of the things I was thinking as well, like, how difficult is it to change? I mean, how inhibiting is the education? You know, when you're walking through getting your, you know, your PhD in whatever medical category you're acquiring it, like, how out of date is that situation? Are they starting to kind of put in endocannabinoid system knowledge into the medical education?
Yeah, well, it's another area that I'm really interested in, and I've tried to open up conversations with universities in the UK. In fact, I've got a few that I'm talking to at the moment. They are becoming more interested in it, and you know, I think COVID and virtual kind of e-learning and online learning is kind of is actually going to work very well for cannabis-based medicines and endocannabinoids and you know, the subject as a whole, because I think it's something that medical schools are going to have to offer. And obviously it's not just medical schools, it's life science, biology, biochemistry, pharmacology degrees, all these different scientific subjects where it's applicable and it's relevant. And I think that the more forward-thinking universities, who, don't forget, a lot of universities are also struggling to retain their students, and you know, a lot of them are virtual now. So
trust me, I'm sure if you slapped a big cannabis leaf on the fucking like projector, people would show up to the class.
Well, yeah, no, I think actually a lot of the serious universities are interested. I mean, there's a group now at Imperial College, so the Sapphire clinics have a link to Imperial through their founders and their doctors. So they've got a nice little research group going there, and I think they're starting to introduce into the curriculum. You know, Imperial is a very well-established, eminent university in London, so it's definitely going to happen. I mean, it's inevitable it's going to happen. It's just going to probably be a bit of a slow rollout, but I think it could be I've always thought the first university that offers this as a diploma or as a kind of a postgraduate subject will kind of really put themselves on the map in time.
Yeah.
And it's happening elsewhere. I think some of the universities in Switzerland and Germany and Israel are kind of like, it's becoming a big part of the curriculum.
Yeah. No, it's exciting times. Cool. I mean, it's like the future's looking more and more green. And the thing is, when you say that as well, like the diverse spectrum of like influences in society, you know, pharmacology, you know, medicine, and then even when talking about hemp and industry and all these different things, it makes you like, no wonder people that are heavily into cannabis are like, oh, like, this is for humanity. This isn't just a wee one stop kind of thing, you know.
Well, it has been used for thousands of years, hasn't it? Throughout like almost every civilization. So there must be something in it that's worth exploring and utilizing.
Yeah, maybe more than one thing, I think, definitely.
You
spoke about Professor Michelin there. Like, what?
Oh yes. Yeah.
Like, what did you take from that conversation? How was it talking to him?
Yeah, that was amazing. So, I mean, the key things I took from him was, firstly, just like it's kind of refreshing to, first of all, just to meet the guy, because he's a bit of a legend, isn't he, in this space. Just to kind of hear his backstory about how he got into it and what the early days were like, and it just felt like he was like a lone ranger out there just doing his thing. You know? Have you heard him talk about how he got hold of the police just gave him like 5 kilograms?
I think I read this.
You sound like a respectable guy, so we'll just let you get on with it. So
he's sitting on the bus home. Is that right?
Yeah. So that's kind of interesting in its own right, but. You know, he's a heavyweight really in plant chemistry and natural, you know, in terms of understanding medical chemistry. So really, I mean, it's quite amazing when you think about what he's done in terms of helping to discover the endocannabinoid system and anandamide and all these things and so on. So what I took from that, I also took some key points about how individuals can really kind of how science is really, all the big steps in discoveries in science really come from individuals, not from like big organizations that are telling their students what to study. So like any society and any system that encourages individual thinking is like a really healthy thing. Also, funny enough, how much we know about the endocannabinoid system. You know, we actually know. Often when you say to a scientist, how much do you think if I'd said to him, how much do we know about the cannabis plant? Probably say, actually, we don't know that much at all, because there's so many compounds that we don't quite know what they do or how they. But when I said to him, how much do we know about the endocannabinoid system? He said, no, actually quite a lot. I think we know the key receptors, the key enzymes. So that's why it could be taught widely through medical schools. And then I guess the other area that we touched upon was kind of what the future holds in terms of research and new medicines. And there's no denying that there's going to be lots of synthetic compounds that are kind of based on phytocannabinoids. You know, they're modeled or they mimic the specific, which is cool. I think that's like amazing. If we get a whole new class of medicines that have all these amazing, you know, they can help with pain or anxiety or osteoporosis. So that's really exciting, I think, for the development of new drugs. And then he's really interested in these acidic precursors. I don't know if you know much about all that.
No.
Sorry, I feel like we're kind of doing a podcast, but I'm talking you through another one.
No. I'm listening.
If it's interesting.
Like, I think it's if they're meaning the acidic precursors, is that's just like CBGA, CBDA, things like that?
Yeah, so like he's written lots about this, but essentially the plant produces these active compounds that very quickly, they're so unstable that as soon as the plant is dried out slightly or it's heated or it's just left for a day or two, like they turn from their THCA into THC and so on. But actually these precursors, these acidic precursors are so potent, and they have such strong effects when you kind of look at them. If you can stabilize them, they have like amazing medical properties for pain and inflammation and stuff. So he's like managed to, I think CBDA is like the thing that he's really focused on, how amazing that is, but it's quite hard to work with. So I think he's made a synthetic version of it or something.
Yeah, that's what's so interesting. And I think personally, I think I always feel frustrated when I hear synthetic versions. It's right to the core of my being. It's like, and I understand it's like, you know, innovation and medicine, and this is just the way things are. But I think that it's the hippie in me, it's the holistic person.
I get it. Like that's fair enough. But I think you might have too. Well, funnily enough, though, he did say the future is both. Like it's natural compounds, natural cannabinoids, and inevitably there'll be new drugs that come to market that are based on like synthetic versions of some of those compounds. But they could be amazing drugs in their own right, for all kinds of diseases and so on. So
it's one of the things that makes me just again the amazing element of cannabis itself, the fact that they've got, like, I always wondered that it's like it almost seems destined that way, that you're in a situation where, as you mentioned, the plant itself is in an inactive form. It's like all the cannabinoids are in the acidic form, so it's inactive. But once you apply heat, you remove the carbon element, you've decarboxylated it, and then therefore it's now active, and then the human gets the response that's required. And it just seems peculiar. It's like a peculiar relationship that actually you have to add fire to activate the correct molecule, really.
Yeah, exactly. The other thing that sort of struck me talking to him recently was, when you think about the plant, I don't think there's any other plant in nature that has. So he said, no, there aren't cannabinoids produced by any other plants. Like, it's unique. Mm-hmm. There isn't anything else in nature that we found that seems to have such, like, no other plant that seems to have such a kind of mix of like amazing, interesting molecules and compounds, that have all these.
I'm actually delighted you're saying that, right? Because you know how I describe this to people? Because I describe this exact thing as a indicator of how wondrous cannabis is. And the way I describe it is that cannabis holds a disproportionate number of phytochemicals compared to including.
There's nothing in nature that
it's completely disproportionate.
It's like unbelievable.
It's
like a it just seems to contain so many interesting things. Like, if you're a scientist or you're inquisitive about things, like, as a plant and as a phenomenon, it's just unique in nature, and it obviously is there for a reason. Like, there's obviously reasons the plant has evolved in the way it did, probably parasites or other things it was fighting off, but it is a bit unusual. I think, how much these plants contain, and the potential to help with all kinds of conditions in humans, of course. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it?
I've actually got it just popped in my head there. I think that there was actually, I think, is this right, that the endocannabinoid system was also registered in dinosaurs? I'm hearing this somewhere. Where am I getting this?
Vertebrates. I think all vertebrates have a endocannabinoid system.
Oh wait, I can't. I'll have to message him. I'll have to ask. So there's a piece of information that's relating to the endocannabinoid system and evolution, which is essentially what we're discussing. And I just forget, so I butcher it.
But what's interesting is that we've not developed an endocannabinoid system because there's a plant that interacts with it. It just so happens that the plant can activate those receptors. Like, we have our own endocannabinoid system. that has evolved kind of along its own lineage. It's weird.
It's interesting. When I was just looking on your LinkedIn, and I seen that you're obviously the PCCN, but then I seen Raphael Mushalam, because I actually emailed him last year, last maybe November, was it October, and he just said, he went, and because you reminded me, it's good because he actually messaged and says, get back in contact at the beginning of next year, it's like March time or something. So hopefully we'll be up for it. Fingers crossed. But yeah, so I mean, is that
because you interviewed Pertwee, didn't you, Roger?
I did.
Professor Pertwee.
That was fun.
Yes, I spoke to him recently. Yeah, that was good. I enjoyed that.
Yeah, did you watch it?
Yeah.
All right, awesome, brilliant, thank you. Yeah, no, that was awesome. Do you know what was frustrating when I was talking to him at the very beginning? It was one of those moments where I thought, like, I hope these questions are enough. It was one of those things, because his knowledge is so substantial that
I know
you kind of not get the most from it if you don't structure the question correctly.
I understand, but like, I don't want to downplay myself as a GP, but we kind of don't. People, these academics are on a different level in terms of, I understand the basics of a lot of this stuff, but those guys are kind of, heavyweights when it comes to understanding the chemistry and all the various things.
Sometimes I got the impression when I asked him a question, I kind of got the impression he's looking at me like, oh, he's trying. I thought I kind of got that look from him, but I was like, come on, man, I'm just trying my best here.
But he started again, like, a lot of people don't know we have these a few of these amazing academics in the UK that have done so much for the field. And obviously his work with Mushalam, he discovered the receptors and all kinds of things.
Right. There's an individual, I think, in Germany called what's his name or her name? I can't. Somebody put the link in. I think it was from the Legalized Cannabis Scotland page, and they just put something like Scotland has Pertwee. England has Barnes and Nut, and Germany has Beckelbauer or something, or Beckel or something.
Okay. Yes. Something. Yes.
I can't remember, but I remember writing it down and then looking on, and they had like a lot of cannabinoid letters after their names. So I was like, right, you'll be coming on the channel.
There's
hopefully.
a few out there, yeah.
But
yeah. Well, you should. It's good. I mean, it's great to kind of, like I said earlier on, it brings together. You know, I'm sure you found the same. Like, you getting to meet people and have conversations with people that you perhaps wouldn't normally do in your
exactly. I'll be honest, Leon, you're the first person I've interviewed this year, to be honest.
Amazing, yeah.
And the reason being is that I don't know if you've seen, but I've spent a lot of the year working on animation stuff. So my character, obviously, this guy here, he was on the comic books. And then I've managed to push him through, and I'm now obviously animating him. So there's
amazing.
It's like a month. It's a monthly episode. Each episode's about 5 minutes long, and the next one for people that are thinking it is actually called a hemping hand. That's the next one.
Okay. Nice.
So
I'll have to check that out.
Yeah. Well, to be honest, if you've not seen it, there's a one that I need to go back and re-edit it, but I might just leave it the way it is. But there's an episode that's the very first animation episode. It's called Nature's Miracle Cure. And I would recommend, if you've got 5 minutes, 10 minutes tonight,
all right, yeah,
or whatever, have a look. It's only 6 minutes long. But that's essentially all about the cannabinoids. And what it is like, I get it so that CANNAMAN that's the police chief's wife, the tincture oil. She takes the tincture on her tongue, and then I make it so that you see the camera kind of zoom into the police chief's wife's eyes, and then I make it so you watch the cannabinoids going through the system, and then they end up fighting the wee grey cells, and they find the endocannabinoid system. So it's fucking ridiculous what I'm talking about.
All right, I'll check it out. You've sold it to me, Connor.
Brilliant.
Sold it to me.
That's my marketing for today. That's what that is.
Nice.
So, I mean, what are you seeing for in the future then? Obviously, you got a lot on for the podcast.
Yeah, I mean, the podcast series is just a bit of a fun project, really. I just thought it'd be good to. I'll tell you what happened was most of the content was coming from me early on, and I just kind of, there's a limit to how much I can do in a week, some of the day. So I actually thought, no, I need to bring people in now to kind of just further the conversation and just build on the resources. So, if there's a GP now, I think, that's interested in the subject, if they go on the website, there's enough on there now to kind of keep them interested, and we can keep up to date. And I'd like to keep finding guests and bringing people onto that. And what else? I guess we've always got webinars throughout the year. So I'm thinking of doing one in a couple of months' time, maybe on I think CBD for GPs and pharmacists would be a really good one, because there are a lot of people out there that don't know much about it. They're interested. Probably some new guidelines, and try and keep up to date with various changes and so on. But no, I mean, it's look, there's always things happening as well. So
that's what I was going to say. Do you know what this kind of seems like? It's kind of difficult to judge, because even you think this time last year, if somebody was to go, this is how it's going to look, cannabis internationally in 3 months' time, you'd know about it, even have a ballpark. It's the same in the UK. It's like, when in 3 months' time, so much could happen,
Yeah, and also, I mean, we publish a newsletter. It's not every month; it's probably every couple of months at the moment. But I do the research roundup myself, and what's interesting is like the amount of studies that are coming out now. So it's quite hard to kind of pick the top 10, say, academic studies from across the globe, because there's normally within a month or two there's dozens, and they're all interesting. So that's really cool.
There was an interesting one with Kyle Esplin. He put obviously Scottish Hemp Association.
The
chair. He was part of the longitudinal study for it's not longitudinal study. It was for long COVID. Is that how you say it? Is it long COVID?
That's going on at the moment, isn't it?
I think so. Yeah. That's quite exciting.
That's
those kind of things. It's like maybe COVID might make it that cannabis is more accessible. You never know.
Yeah. Well, I think there could be a really good, long COVID, although it's kind of a new phenomenon, it seems to overlap with chronic fatigue and pain and poor sleep, and these are all things that cannabis is shown to really help with. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see potentially medical cannabis is a really good treatment for long COVID in time. But the study, the data will appear inevitably, and hopefully we can have a look at that.
I'm not sure. Is it this year that the drug science data is collected and distributed this year? Is that this year or next?
I mean, I don't know when they're publishing any formal studies, but they tend to. I know every month they they give you an idea of the number of patients and the conditions that are being prescribed for.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, that's certainly moving in the right direction. I'm not sure they've quite hit the numbers they were hoping for yet, but it's going to be good data, interesting data. Yeah,
I'm looking forward to it, to be honest. That was exciting when it came out, when they started pushing it through. These kind of things are, needed, to say the least. It does kind of seem like, dragging a feet in the UK.
I know, and there's so much global data though. That's the thing, isn't it? It's like we could all just kind of pull together and try and look at other.
Yeah. Well, this is the frustrating thing. I remember I went interviewed Hannah Deacon. She said the exact thing when she came back from Netherlands.
Yeah,
sitting there with her like UK-based doctors, GPs, whatever, and they disregarded the information immediately. They're like, that's over in Holland, though. That's not relevant.
Yeah.
Another good thing, it was actually quite funny. I was uploading some of the stuff onto WeedTube. It's like the cannabis variety for.
Oh yeah, I don't know that, but
I didn't know either. Actually, I got somebody messaged me through the channel and says, "Hey, you should kind of put this stuff up." And funnily enough, I did it last year. I put like half a dozen videos up, and then this year I put one up yesterday. I was like, "Oh shit, I should have really kept doing this." But the reason I'm saying this is that it was kind of it was good because the adverts that came up, like on YouTube, it'll be like insurance or it'll be like Fiverr or something like that. Well, the adverts that come up on YouTube are cannabis-based adverts, and it was so unusual to see. It was comforting, obviously. It's comforting, but, you had got bongs and people with products and like things like that.
Oh, amazing. It's the whole world, isn't it? I'll tell you an interesting country that I think we could match hopefully in time is Australia. So Australia legalized, I think it was a year before us. They rescheduled. Initially, it started with specialists, and then quite soon after that, GPs were allowed to prescribe. Right. So most of the prescribing is now done by GPs, and there's a lot of
it's like wide scale prescribing. It's not just like a narrow symptom.
Yeah, it's no, they can prescribe for anything.
Right. Okay.
And they don't need to go through this multidisciplinary team. They've got a lot more autonomy about, they have to apply to be to prescribe that class of drugs and so on. But there's loads of GPs now prescribing all across Australia. And some of the health insurance policies are now covering scripts, or they're supplementing scripts. So that would be a great point to get to in the UK, where GPs can prescribe, and maybe some of the health insurance providers would be open to supplementing treatments or covering some of those costs. I mean, that's realistic, I think.
I've got a friend that's, I don't know, actually, I'm not even going to attempt to describe her job because she'll, criticize me for it. I'll probably get it wrong, butcher it. But she described, it was 2 or 3 years ago. I think I've spoken about this on the channel before, but it was about 2 or 3 years ago, and I gave her my book, A Case for Cannabis. And it's all like academic referenced, and it was all talking about endocannabinoid system, all these bits and pieces. And she was completely disregarded it. She was kind of like, oh, nah, that's cool. And I'd said to her this 2 years ago, I was like, you're going to have to learn this stuff. This is coming your way. And it was just about 2 or 3 months ago that she was telling me that she'd messaged me, and she was like saying that one of my friends has just conducted a talk on the efficiency for cannabis medicines on kidney disease, and she was like, and I just thought about you straight away because there's this big public talk, and there's a very place in that, and I was like, I told you this is good.
This happens to everyone. So I've had colleagues who I spoke to years ago saying, I'm working in this area and doing all these various things, and sort of had a bit of a, you what? Sorry, what? All right, good luck. And then I bumped into them recently, saying, "Oh my God, you're the guy that's into medical cannabis and CBD and everything." Oh, everyone's talking about it at the moment. Like all my patients and loads of doctors are like asking me questions as well about this and that. And I'm like, okay, all right, sign up.
So that's good. That's good. You'll feel that feeling of relief. But I'll tell you, like the magnitude of relief I have when I hear individuals such as yourself or others talking about this is like, because honestly, when I was 13, man, I remember everybody. It was bizarre, even the teachers and stuff. And even though I will point out, I think my history teacher was a cannabis consumer. He would regularly show up with like super red eyes, late for the lesson, showing up with books that wasn't even for us, that kind of stuff. So it's like, in fact, that's funny. He was definitely a cannabis consumer. He gave me a shot of Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. That's like an ultimate stoner movie. Like he gave me a shot of that. A teacher gave a pupil a shot of that DVD. Jesus, I was destined for this.
No, Connor, I don't know what's happened in the past. It sounds a little bit dodgy though, doesn't it?
It's like trading DVDs, man. Stoner DVDs.
Exactly.
But no, it's good. But no, Leon, this has been fun. Essentially, we've come
it's been good.
Talk about. You got anything you want to throw in before we get going?
I don't think so. I think it's really hard for patients to. I've spoken to a lot of patients how they've felt with their GPs talking about cannabis use, and it's actually really difficult because they just don't know what they're going to get back. So some of them, and this is not just using, say, illicit cannabis from the illicit market, but talking about medical cannabis or CBD, and it's just really unknown kind of the response they're going to get back from their doctors. So yeah, it's tricky. And I think, for those patients that are confident or they know their GPs well, I think I'd just say encourage you to talk about it. And then you can always signpost your doctor to the MCCS or the PCCN if they want to learn more about it, or to drug science and T21. But it's hard because like a lot of patients don't have the confidence to do that, or they don't want to talk about it. But I think we need to keep talking about it and just keep trying to break down all these barriers and just normalize the conversation, basically.
Yeah,
I think it's really important we do that.
I fully agree. Funny that I was wondering how many viewers will be watching this with hopefully relief that they've done the same thing you're describing. They've spoke with their GP and they've had a positive response, because I wonder how many people haven't. I wonder how many people have spoken about it.
A lot haven't, unfortunately. A lot still get, because we did a survey last year and we interviewed over 1,000 GPs. It's a really interesting survey. And some of the, overall, they were quite conservative in their views, but there was a good proportion who were willing to prescribe if they were given the training, and they recognize that the benefits for certain conditions. But we got comments coming through, like free text comments, that some of them were just outrageous. Like crazy things about cannabis and its place in society, and it's, if you really want me to say what and get off the fence, and I'll tell you what I think about this.
Jesus,
so
but
unfortunately, like some patients might be the brunt of that time, and that's not acceptable. That's not on. So
that's what I was thinking when they potentially, I wonder how many viewers have done that. They've took it to their GP and they've been met with that response as a consequence.
Yeah, and that can be really damaging long term for that relationship. So and I'm sure that doesn't exist anymore in, say, Canada. If you went to see can you imagine in Canada, you go to see your GP and say, I'm interested in cannabis-based medicine or prescription, or I want to go to a dispensary. Fine, like if I don't do it, go and see my colleague next door who will sort you out.
Yeah. Like I had an image of the GP guy actually stubbing a joint as the guy's talking, like, no worries, mate, we'll sort that for you.
But like that's how it is in a market that's just taken I think a much more grown-up, sensible approach to the whole conversation. And so those patients don't have to go through that kind of horrible process of like, oh, he's judging me, or he's going to judge me, or should I say it, shouldn't I say it? Just talk, like we need to talk about it and just find a way of doing this properly.
That feeling of being judged is really one that it's bizarre. It's a bizarre thing. The entirety of the cannabis movement is becoming more accessible and more liberated. It's got so many different factors involved, so many different like productive elements, but so many, I think, things where, I don't know, in a few years' time, there'll be so many people that will be like, oh yeah, cannabis, I don't remember being criticised, where you have people in the back that'll be like, most of my life I was criticised.
Yeah, I know. I know. That's what I mean. It comes back to, remember this, when we first started talking about this, there's so much, it's such a complicated subject, isn't it? There's so many like social undertones, and there's people that have been criminalized and ostracized, and like it's really complicated subject actually. So that's why I do try and sort of come in from my angle, general practice medicine. So I feel that's where I've got most to contribute.
No, definitely. And the thing is, as well, it's great to have like such a an intermediate situation where you've got people that are open like yourself. Because let's say if we didn't have individuals such as yourself doing what you're doing, educating, then we would just be still at the same gridlock of people shouting on one side of the fence and other people on the side of the fence not listening.
And there's a lot more coming through. I've got loads of colleagues now that are interested in this and happy to talk about it.
I mean, do you see rising numbers when you with the forums you do, the educational seminars? Do you see like numbers continuously increasing?
Yeah. Month on month.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
Yeah, there's no wonder people are becoming more interested then, really.
Yeah, they will be, but I think it's always going to be a fraction of doctors that prescribe. But that's okay. Like we don't need every doctor to understand it and prescribe it. Well, no, we do need every doctor to understand it and the basics, but they don't all need to want to prescribe. medical cannabis, but that doesn't matter. We only need a small percentage, and we can cover the population.
It seems like the war will be won educationally when, like for medical side, for once the universities adopt it as standard practice. That will be like.
I think so, Connor. That's it, really. Get in there early when people are, when young medics are training up or people go through university, they just learn it as a science.
Yeah.
And then gradually over time, I think we'll just, hopefully in a few years, we'll look back at just like this whole thing is just going to be framed in a completely different way.
Thanks to Leon for giving me his time, and thanks to you for sticking around until the end of the video. I sincerely hope you enjoyed the content. I'll see you next time.